Hi, friends. Hello. I am just so honored to present you the last episode of my second season. This is the grand finale. And, I record things ahead of time, so I never really know the exact date that things are going to come out because I do them in batches. And I'm just so honored by the synchronicity of this finale episode. I think everyone's going to love it. I love producing it, I love bringing the message forward. It's been a magical year. I can't explain how many things have happened this year in my family. My mom had heart surgery. We lost my father in law. My son had huge jaw surgery. We were up and down. My husband had foot surgery. I mean, it's just been like one heck of a year, 2023. But I've had this community and I've had these people who bring these amazing messages, and I'm sharing my magic with everyone. And you guys are sharing my episodes. I mean, 22 countries this year. I couldn't believe it. I looked at my year-end wrap up and 22 countries, thousands of downloads just on the one platform. That's not even YouTube or any other things that I'm doing on LinkedIn. And so it's just an honor, and I just can't believe how things have grown and evolved. And so I want to let you know that I cherish your attention, I honor your ears, and I give you my heart. And I say from my heart to yours, and I really mean it. Thank you for helping me live my life of love. And thank you for sharing my book. This has been amazing too. This has been the catalyst for me to share my platform. And yeah, so I'm honoring the spirit of a new year and closing this season. I'm already working on season 3. And with your help, we'll continue. And please share the message. If you think of someone, if someone's face enters your mind when you hear a message or we're talking about a struggle, please, that's the universe telling you, share it. The more we can share these messages of inspiration and love, the sooner we transform the world. And I believe that's happening. And I thank you for your contribution, and I love you. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Life of Love, where we meet every Thursday and talk about magic and joy. And always some synchronicities happen for me when I'm getting to meet friends and authors and just people of like-mindedness. And so this is no exception. I'm really excited to introduce Susan Gold to Life of Love. She is an author, and she's had a long career um, of promoting and being in the entertainment field. And then also she's learned a lot about healing, and she's written a book. So without further ado, welcome Susan to the show. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you.
Julie, I'm thrilled to be here, and I just want to put a plug right up front.
What's that?
Yeah, for the Life of Love book that you published. I got it maybe a month ago, and I love the messaging. I love the way it's laid out, and it really speaks to my heart, and I know what it takes to put a book out, and this is an important one. I have chill bumps all over my body. So thank you for your work.
Oh, and maybe it's because we're on the same heart energy that you did that, because I've never had a guest call out and help me with my book, like telling people about my book. So that's just very special. That's a first. And I love how at the end of your book, you have action steps for people to move through difficult situations, and that, you have resources that you take the reader through your roller coaster of your life and all the things, the challenges. And I was reading your book and tearing up. And like I told you in the pre-interview, I just wanted to hold you as a little child and be like, this is not how the world's supposed to be. I just wanted to make it all better for you. And you're so courageous. And so, yeah, I honor that in your authenticity. And so that's what I really like to write about, is being authentic to your joy and finding that. And it's been your life path to distill the joy and to break down paradigms that were holding you back, or just survival mechanisms. So I would love for you to share. I don't want everyone to have a spoiler, but could you give a little background? I know you've done this a million times, but just to catch my readers up to your story. And then I have some questions. When I was reading, I really wanted to ask you. So I'd like to do that after you give your short bio or whatever's on your heart to share is perfect.
Well, Julie, I didn't really know to the core of my being that my upbringing was much different than yours, but I knew something was awry, and I knew very early on. There were 5 children. I was smack in the middle. My dad is a genius astrophysicist. He's still with us today. He's a hoot, but boy, was he a big Peter Pan and alcoholic and womanizer. And my mother had 5 children within very short succession. And she self-soothed with food by overeating. And back then, they prescribed diet pills for that. Well, back then, diet pills were straight speed. So it was not a hotbed of mental health. And I also believe my mother was struggling with a mental illness. Her mood would shift on a dime. She could be incredibly loving, and she could give Martha Stewart a run for her money. I mean, she was very talented. And she could be nurturing. And then the next moment, I was being beaten for what I didn't know what and why. So I had very low self-worth, value, self-esteem. I was in complex trauma most of my upbringing. I was very empathic. I could sense the emotion of the room and the temperament. I could hear the thoughts of the adults until it became too dangerous to interpret those thoughts. And about 10, I started to really shut down. And by 12, I was shut down tight, and I was focused on getting out and how I was going to get out. And I left the morning after I graduated from high school at 7:45 in the morning. The car was packed, and I had watched Barbara Walters on my beanbag chair in my basement on my belly. And I wanted to go to New York City and be like her, Julie. So at 19, I found myself living in Greenwich Village alone. I had negotiated myself out of college for a term to do an internship in New York for an arts management firm. And that was, unheard of at the time. Now you have to almost have an internship to graduate. But back then they wanted you to stay in your track and don't deviate. But I did deviate, and I went right back there as soon as I graduated from college. And I was tired of working with these performance artists. I wanted to work more with mainstream talent. So I got a job at International Creative Management. It's a very large talent agency that's still in existence today. Ultimately went to work for the head of the celebrity commercial division. He left and formed his own agency and invited me with him. So I think I was 24. And I was learning how to negotiate talent deals because we were working in a studio apartment. And it was great experience professionally. But this gentleman had a sexual addiction, and he used to invite actresses in for their moment. And I was asked to leave, and it was so slimy and horrible. And it kicked up so much trauma and shame in me. And then one day he tried it on me.
On you.
So I had been personal trainer on the side to several people, exercise training to make ends meet. And Barbara Walters was a client. So I rang her doorbell the next morning at 7 a.m. and she took one look at me, Julie, and she said, "Susan, get in here." I'm like, what is wrong with you?
She knew, yeah.
She was so intuitive. She would have loved you. She's a girl's girl. And she got it out of me within moments. And she said, "I'm coming to work with you this morning, and we're going to confront this man together." And I said,
"This is before Me Too movement. Like, that wasn't even a thing. This was in the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
oh my God.
And I said, "You know what? I got it. It's okay." So I did confront him that day, and he promptly fired me. I had 2 months of money in the bank. I was newly sober because the same the same issues that I saw growing up were starting to happen in my own life. I couldn't go anywhere without knowing there was going to be a drink. I didn't know if it was the first drink or the fifth drink that was going to get me drunk. I just wanted out of my own body. I took a slug from the wine jug at work to ask for a raise. I knew that was wrong. My friends were becoming more and more fair weather. So I got sober. That's a whole nother story. I've been clean and sober ever since. And that's been, absolutely the mandate for my recovery and my having a full life. But I also had just extricated myself from an abusive relationship where the gentleman held the purse strings, and I was terrified I would go back into that relationship, but I could not be an assistant any longer. And Barbara offered for her then fiance, who was running a film distribution company. And I said, Barbara, I just can't be an assistant anymore. I'm so grateful, but I just can't. And I launched my own talent brokerage firm and somehow was introduced to Donnie Deutsch, who was running his dad's ad agency. Now he's an iconic television host and entrepreneur, but then he wanted Andy Warhol to endorse the Pontiac dealers.
I love that part. That was so good.
And we were introduced, and he said, do you think you can do it? And I said, well, I'll try. And I had no idea. And I was 25 and shaking in my shoes, but I wanted this deal so desperately. I couldn't get anyone to answer the phone at the factory. So I took the subway down from the Upper West Side to Murray Hill, where his brownstone was. I knocked on the door. And Fred, his business manager, answered. So I went in and, we had a little conversation while I was there. He goes, okay, come back tomorrow and I'll let you talk to Andy. So I thought, okay, well, at least there's some kind of chance if he's going to let me talk to Andy. So I showed up the next day. I waited. And finally, 2 double doors opened. It was Fred. He said, Andy, we'll see you now. And it was a dark studio. And there was a pin spotlight in the center, and I was scared to go in there. I went in, and there's his platinum hair going 17 different directions, and he's scribbling on his paper with colored pencils, and 3 pugs, those little dogs with the smushed up faces. They were running around the studio. And I go into my spiel, and he could care less. He's not looking at me. He's penciling. He's occasionally looking at the dog and picking them up in his arms like they're little babies. And I saw this because one of the skills I got in my home was to intuit the other person's energy and their desires and their hopes. And I could feel his isolation, his desire to connect, and his desire to be recognized. And finally, he looked up, and it's the first time he looked me in the eye. And he said, now really, Susan, why should I do this? And I said, because you can have the pugs in the shot with you. I didn't know if it was true or not, but I had nothing to lose.
Why wouldn't they be in the shot? That's what he wanted. So you landed a commercial with Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol. That was my first deal in my company. And it really sort of helped me solidify my reputation for matching celebrities to brands. And ultimately that got me into producing for television and then film.
Such an amazing story. You had a superpower because you had to do it to survive. You had to constantly read your mom and maybe tiptoe around your dad, depending on what level he had gotten to on that bottle. Or, you had to deal with meeting his mistresses. Like when you were introduced at that picnic, I just wanted to just die. I wanted to choke him. Like, why, and it's just you really had to rise above so many things. But when you look back, you're like, well, you never would have been pushed to go to New York or create your own major. Like at Ohio University, they didn't even have an internship for your major, and you just went up and asked for it. And your intuitive skills, and that's when I wanted to ask you. Several times you mentioned in your book, in a difficult situation, you felt your feet go into the ground. And I don't know if you realize it, but it seemed like you were connecting to Mother Gaia or source energy. And I don't know if you want to expand on those times in your book, or if anything comes to your mind about when you're, or maybe a situation where you've done that, and maybe if you can say how you started doing it. I don't know. Give me some insight on that.
Well, you are so insightful and creative to ask that question, because I've not been asked that question, and only you would ask it. And I'm so grateful, Julie. So, yes, I had to connect with my being because so often I was ungrounded. I was living with trauma. My central nervous system was working on overdrive. I didn't have a lot of worth and value. So I was living from the outside in rather than the inside out. And I knew I needed to connect and ground. So often that's how I would do it. I would feel my 2 feet on the ground. And now I actually do send love to Mother Gaia, and I feel the energy come up through the ground and through me. I tell my son to do that now without his rubber sole shoes on, but yeah, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I totally believe that, yes, indeed, I was grounding and
Mm.
asking for the power and the value and the worth to come up through Mother Gaia and feed me. And I was always protected.
Mm-hmm. You were. And I just, I picture you as a young woman navigating the streets of New York City and extricating all those hundreds of cockroaches out of that apartment. When you were helping that lady and living in an apartment, and how you just went to resource. You've always lived in this creative, resourceful, I'm gonna make this fit what I need. And I do think that's why you were addicted to exercise, is that you're trying to just run through everything because you knew you needed to get it out. But that repetitive movement and I don't know if you want to talk about how perfectionistic you were with your workouts, and how you had to learn self care um,
Yeah,
through.
so physicality was always important. We were really pitted against each other, like the Kennedys. We were, the five of us were always playing, doing, going, romping.
Mm-hmm.
And, my father, looking back, had exercise bulimia. I didn't see that at the time.
Oh, yeah, it's so.
And I too soothed through food. So food for me was a weapon. And I would eat in equal value to my output, how I was exercising. And I started running at the end of college, and then I started marathoning, and I was getting too many injuries marathoning. So here's the genius. I'll start triathloning. I'll spread it out over 3 sports.
Yeah.
And that way, maybe I won't have all the injuries that are coming with all this excessive running. And then I was getting too many injuries with the triathloning. So I
Mm-hmm.
decided I'm going to become a nationally ranked master swimmer.
I know. You just don't go halfway. You're so fun.
And I started training like a heroin addict would use heroin.
Mm-hmm.
I was training like an NC2A athlete, way over that age bracket. And I hired Olympians and world champions to help teach me to swim. And I would do double workouts, and I would do kettlebells, and then I would go to hot yoga, and I was walking my
Oh,
dog around the block,
yeah.
3 times a day. And I had this whole persona, and I had no connection to that worn, beaten little Susie inside my
Mm-hmm.
heart that was absolutely getting trampled on.
Right.
And I had no temperature for saying no when it wasn't comfortable for me because I didn't ask. I was desperate to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And to prove to yourself, because that was, in your marriage. That's when you went to swimming. If I remember correctly, your marriage didn't wasn't working out. Like he was not showing up for you and your son, and so I think that might be in how you cycled through that trauma of, you had to forgive yourself for getting into that place you promised yourself you'd never be, right? Like you said, I'm not going to be that person. And then your
Yeah.
body's like, no, you need to deal with this emotionally, not just physically. Like you've gotta forgive yourself. You've gotta be vulnerable. And that whole path of doing that it was just amazing to witness.
The universe has given me many gifts, and
Mm.
most of them have come in the form of trauma. And it's taken me a long time to see that
Mm-hmm.
as reality. I mean, facing addiction early on. And then I had a 10-year struggle with clinical depression and learning how to work with that. And then it was the over exercise and endurance athletics. And little known to me, it was ultimately narcissistic abuse that pulled the whole train wreck down on my head. I was invited from New York City to LA for a career move that looked so golden, and it
Mm-hmm.
was. I'm really glad I took it. But really, I was invited there to meet my biggest guru. And that was the
Mm.
man who would become my ex husband. And when I say the word guru, I mean as in teacher.
Yeah.
And I really felt this man was my
Mm-hmm.
match finally, because I had made so many mistakes. I mean, since second grade in Billy Fritz, I was wired at the hip to some boy who would give me
Mm-hmm.
attention and I could be worthy and valued. So it was again from the outside in, and I was codependent and I was a caretaker and I was
Mm-hmm.
controlling and I didn't want you to leave, even when it was painful for me. So ultimately, the billboard that had to fall on my head, I had bought a home for our family in Southern California. We had a son, and I
Mm-hmm.
was really feeling drained. He was not coming up to the plate with a sense of integrity. And
Mm-hmm.
I was running and plugging dikes and fixing. And I cried when he went to the paint store with me towards the end of our marriage. And I knew there was an expiration date that was well past due.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make him accountable through a post-nuptial agreement. We got to the last point in mediation. I was like, yay, my marriage is saved. When he folded his arms and his eyes went into those cold reptilian like slits, and he
Oh.
said, I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. And that intuitive voice was so powerful, coming over my right shoulder and in through my heart.
Mm-hmm.
This is the universe doing for you what you will not do for yourself.
Mm.
And we went back to what was then our home. And he took up residence in the master. And I, by choice, took a mattress across the floor of our home into a partial conversion in our garage. And for one calendar year, that became my monastery. And that's where I went in deep to
Mm.
do somatic work to clear this trauma. I had done so much therapy. I had practiced so many modalities. If there was an A on the end of the meeting, I had been to it and participated
Mm.
wholeheartedly. But here I was. And the way that I learned to successfully divorce one I feel is a narcissist is to hold no contact, meaning no verbal contact and no
Mm-hmm.
eye contact. And that's what it took. And every time it felt unjust, and every time I wanted to rail against what seemed absurdity, I just kept hearing, this is the universe doing for you what you
Thank you.
cannot do for yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
within a calendar year, we came to an agreement. I wrote him a 6-figure check, and he went on to his next source of supply. And I call him my greatest teacher or guru because I learned my power authentically for the first time. And I gained compassion and connected with that sweet inner child within me, that piece of soul that's walking this walk with me. And I became the woman I always wanted to be, but could not. And he reflected all that back to me. And I am so grateful.
Mm. It's just awesome. That's so wonderful. And you basically started over after that because you had to keep your house and deal with that the big payment to it was the state of California was was, I can't remember what the law was, but you said you didn't realize the state of California had this divorce law that they get half no matter what, or yeah.
And I was after 10 years, they get half no matter what. My divorce attorney said this law has got to change. They're seeing so many women just, really on the short end of a stick. And it is what it is. It was what I needed to learn. And it was the lesson I needed to walk through. And I converted that partial conversion in the garage into an income suite. And he cleared all his belongings out of there. He was a collector and had floor to ceiling, and I turned that into a money-making suite. It paid half my mortgage, my taxes, and my insurance. And there were so many miracles that happened all throughout that period and after. And it was really an acknowledgement that this is a life of love, that I can choose to see it, my challenges and my challengers, in a positive light if I choose. And miracles happen, help is there, support is there. And I have tried to come from a place of love each time.
Yeah, because that's how you get to your creativity, because you're not a victim. You're accepting and you're owning your part, and then your heart can open up to the possibilities, and you're a living testament to it, and just cheering for you. I want to read you, with your permission, a portion of, and I just wanted to read it to you, and then you can respond if you want, or we can just move on. But it said, I noticed a white and golden fleckled, misty and wet energy in my room. Telepathically, the gentle force was directing me to release any shame or guilt, urging me to self-forgiveness, and affirming my ex and uncle as playing old and dying patriarchal masculine roles.
Julie, I love that you picked it out. So that was a dream I had. It was not too long after the divorce, and often narcissists will turn family members against you. And I saw the manipulation happening before we even got to the point of knowing we were going to go through a divorce. And it was a dearly loved aunt and uncle. I didn't have any other family on the West Coast at the time. And I had guilt after I survived this experience. I had guilt for surviving it. And that was the dream. And it was lucid. And I was in an awakened state in what you're describing there. That energy, that moisture was tangible in the room. And that was the messaging that I needed to let them go. I needed to forgive myself and release the guilt, because empaths, people that are so sympathetic to others, will often carry emotion that is not ours. And I certainly was, until I had that gift of that dream.
And then I love how you said you had to put aside resentment and make forgiveness your sole focal point, or fall. It took discipline, and you had to trust you were moving toward a very different mindset and living a way that you'd never experienced, and that trust was not your middle name. And I loved what you did to passing drivers. And it's so illuminating that you did it in LA, one of the worst traffic situations in the whole world. And this is what you're doing. Can I share with the audience what you did in your car? Silently, I'd begin wishing passing drivers, passengers, and pedestrians what I wanted for myself: peace, abundance, compassion, goodness, light, safety, and joy. I wanted to fully embody the phrase, I am light. I am the light I am.
And that was a simple and beautiful way to do it. I actually learned that from a teacher named Matt Kahn. And he has people put hands on heart and say, I love you. And believe me, in 2014, when I was doing that, it was not comfortable. It was not tasteful at all. But it has really helped change the reality that I live in. And I live with much more peace and much more freedom than I ever have, Julie. And it's such a privilege to come and share it with you and your listeners today. And I really want to give them a message of hope and inspiration that if it can happen for me, it can happen for you too.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I will put a link to your book. If, it's just a wonderful, wonderful adventure to go on with you. And you're such a heroine, and just, I love being in this space with you. So thanks for taking the time.
Julie, thank you. And thanks to your listeners. And I'm going to encourage them again to pick up your book. It sounds like we're promoting each other's books and nothing more, but this has magic and purpose and point. And I've read the messages from the angels, and I've gone into the appendix and I've searched it out. When I needed self-worth, I knew exactly where to go. And the beauty is there. It's so poignant. So thank you for the book. And also thank you for the Life of Love podcast. It takes energy, it takes finance, it takes time, it takes emotion to produce all the content that you are. And I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you. I'll keep doing it till I can't, because like I say, every day's a chance to live the life of your dreams. And so connecting with people like you helps it seem more like a dream. So much love.